Welcome to the Blue Couch, Admiral.
It's good to be here.
Every hour, every minute, we are getting new figures about losses and wins in Ukrainian war. How do you expect the war will develop or maybe freeze in the next month?
Let me start by saying that wars are extremely difficult to predict because it is two nations with very smart people trying to gain an advantage over the other nation. And that is a continuous process where you will have to not only develop plans, but also have troops and have the right training and have the right equipment and have enough ammunition and take advantage of an opportunity. So that's what both nations are doing. I think both nations face similar problems. Both are looking for personnel, for new soldiers. Both are looking for new capabilities, and both are looking for more ammunition. And in general, I would say that Russia focuses more on quantity than on quality, and Ukraine focuses more on quality than on quantity. It is fascinating, though, that this is a war that is now ongoing for 10 years. And in 10 years, Russia has not been able, a country that is 4 times the size of Ukraine in terms of their population and in terms of their economy, not in physical size because Russia is much larger, but in terms of economy and number of people, Russia has 4 times the number of people in Ukraine. And Russia has not been able to achieve any of its strategic goals. So the front at the moment is very difficult for Ukraine. So the Russians are very slowly against very heavy losses. We're talking closer to 1,500 soldiers dying and wounded, getting wounded per day. It's enormous, those numbers. So it is difficult at the front, but the Ukrainians are not folding. So it is not that the front collapses. And the Ukrainians have held their stance for 10 years now and have retaken half of what the Russians originally took at the start of the war. And so I think in many ways we can only admire what the Ukrainians are doing. And we need to continue to help them because they don't lack courage. They need our help in terms of weapons and ammunition and money. And we've organized that through NATO in the summit in Washington. So we will help them through this NSATU command with the coordination of training, the coordination of making sure they get all the stuff they need to fight the war, and then the logistics to get it to their border. And fourthly, to work on their future armed forces. So it is difficult. The Russians are grinding on and moving forward. I think both nations want to have the best possible position when the moment arrives to sit down and talk about a deal.
Technological superiority is crucial for multi-dimensional operations or dominance in operations. How can NATO make sure that the alliance keeps the upper hand in defense technology?
So we are developing a number of things. One is the Diana. It's a huge equity fund. It's the first, let's say, governmental private equity fund, so to say. It has $1 billion in it, and a lot of nations are participating. And it works on, let's say, very essential and research, and to make sure that also startups have an opportunity to participate in the development of defense capabilities. Because for a long time, in the last 30 years, most of the breakthroughs in technology didn't come any longer from defense, but from the civilian side. And certain things are still defense and not civilian. So we need to work on certain capabilities that are purely defense and not like dual use from civilian. So I think Diana is a good example. I think the different exercises where we, like in Portugal, Rapsmus, I think it's called, where they exercise and train with new technologies and new capabilities. And actually, we allow ourselves to fail sometimes to make sure that we go in the right direction. To make sure that we not only focus on the big capabilities like fighter aircraft and submarines and aircraft carriers, but also on the little things like unmanned and in combination with artificial intelligence. And so all these developments are out there. And I think it is important to make sure that we understand it, not only on the industrial side, but also on the armed forces side. So that cooperation through exercises and experimentation is so important. And I think that is one of the reasons why we are moving that way. But you're absolutely right. We have to make sure that we continue to understand what is out there in new technology and then translate it into new capabilities.
The US might no longer support Europe's security, or Europe has to stand for its own security more, according to the election in the US. How can Europe, how can we step up amid shrinking economies and public spending disputes?
I am not part of the school that thinks the US is going to leave Europe. I'm not. Because I think it is in the interest of the US to have a strong and stable Europe, because we are their first trading partner, for example. And for trade and economic activity, you need stability and you need security. So the United States is not leaving Europe. That's not what is going to happen. What the United States wants, and that became clear, of course, in his first term as president, when President Trump was president, and will continue in his second term, is that he wants European nations to take more responsibility for their own defense, for their own building up their own armed forces. And that is connected to Article 3 in the Washington Treaty, which says every nation needs to be able to defend itself. It starts with that. And for too long, nations in Europe, and Canada, by the way, thought that that was no longer necessary. First, because there was no threat, because Russia was a partner. But secondly, that if there was a problem, the United States would step in and solve it basically for us. And I think that's wrong. And I understand, and it wasn't only President Trump, it was also President Reagan and others who were irritated about this. So the reason that we now moved from 6 nations at a minimum of 2% to 23 is also the result of his plea, his pressure during his first term as president. So it's not against Europe, it is against the nations that are not taking the responsibility for their own defense. If that happens, if all the nations live up to the agreements or the promises they basically made themselves, I think we are not having a lot of trouble with President Trump in that respect. I don't think he's against NATO. I think he was against the fact that a large number of nations actually in NATO didn't take all the articles of the Washington Treaty seriously. And that is now the case. So we can actually, so the new Secretary General, Mr. Rutte, can actually go to President Trump and say, President Trump, we actually thank you for what you did in your first term, because now 23 nations are at a minimum of 2%, and more will follow. So I think that is good in a way for NATO. It's good that President Trump put the pressure on all of us.
But seems like you're expecting trouble in other issues.
No, I think that is primarily what is probably affecting NATO. The other thing that might happen is that if the United States has to reprioritize, because there's other issues in the world, like in Indo-Pacific with China, then they might have to not withdraw from Europe, but they might have to take out a number of assets that are in Europe. Maybe, for example, ballistic missile defense warships that are now in Europe. So if Europe has those capabilities, European navies have those capabilities, then if the Americans leave to solve this other problem, because they have more priorities than just the defense of Europe and the Atlantic, then NATO is still in a good place. It doesn't mean US is leaving NATO or seeing NATO as less important. It is because they have other priorities as well, that they are able to take out assets, capabilities. And if we invest in the capabilities that now only the US has, then actually it is a much more balanced alliance, because the security in Europe will not be affected as much if the US has to take out some of their capabilities to other regions.
Thank you very much for your time.
It's been a pleasure.